The ceiling was wrong. Cale Marin's eyes opened to a surface that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, soft teal light crawling through translucent membranes like something alive. The surface breathed. He could feel it through the slab beneath him, a rhythmic contraction that had nothing to do with his own heartbeat. His mouth tasted like copper and antiseptic, and something faintly botanical he couldn't name. He sat up, the room tilted, then corrected. A curved chamber, seamless walls the color of wet bone, no visible door. His uniform was still on, the charcoal gray flight suit of the Terran Cooperative's Expeditionary Training Division, but the patches had been removed. His name tape, his rank tab, his unit insignia, all stripped clean. Just a blank human, in a blank room on a world that wasn't his. The wall opened. Not a door sliding aside, but the wall itself peeling apart like skin separating from muscle, and through it stepped a figure that made Cale's hindbrain fire a warning he had to consciously override. Tall, nearly 2.5 meters, with a torso that was too narrow for its height and limbs that bent at angles human joints didn't permit. Its skin was the color of storm clouds, textured with fine ridges that ran in geometric patterns from its temples to its wrists. 2 primary eyes, amber, plus a third set lower on the face near the jaw hinge, milky and unfocused, that Cale guessed served a different sensory purpose entirely. "You are conscious," the figure said. The words came from somewhere in its chest, not its mouth, which remained closed. Earlier than projected. "Where am I?" Veteran Ascendancy Combat Institute. Orbital Campus, 3rd Ring. You are Cohort 9, Section Tertiary. A pause. The jaw eyes rotated slightly, scanning him. "You are the human." Cale swung his legs off the slab. His boots were gone. The floor was warm, slightly yielding, like standing on dense cartilage. "I'm a human. There's a reason my patches are gone." All cadets enter unmarked. Rank is earned inside. Your prior credentials are irrelevant. My prior credentials include 400 hours in Atmo combat rigs and a combat deployment to Shen Cora. The alien, an instructor of some kind, Cale figured, regarded him with an expression he couldn't read. The geometric ridges on its face shifted, rearranging into a different pattern. "That information has been noted and discarded. You will begin with Cohort 9. Orientation assembles in 900 heartbeats." It turned and left, the wall sealed behind it. Cale stood barefoot on a living floor, stripped of every marker that said he'd already proven himself once, and breathed in through his nose. He let the breath out slowly. Then he found his boots lined up beneath the slab, put them on, and waited for the wall to open again. It did precisely 900 heartbeats later. He'd counted. The corridor was wide enough for 3 of the tall aliens to walk abreast, its walls lined with the same bioluminescent veining. Other cadets were already moving through it, and Cale got his first real look at the student body of the Veteran Ascendancy's premier military institute. Tall storm gray veteran in fitted training wraps, their ridge patterns all slightly different. A cluster of squat, broad-shouldered beings with armored carapaces the color of oxidized copper, their legs ending in splayed pads that gripped the cartilage floor with audible clicks. A pair of something that moved like liquid poured into a bipedal mold, their surfaces reflective, shifting between silver and dark blue. All of them taller than Cale, most of them wider, every single one looking at him like he was a misprint in the enrollment roster. He kept his hands loose at his sides, his pace steady, and followed the flow of cadets into a vast chamber that could have been an amphitheater carved from the inside of a living organ. Tiered seating rose in concentric rings around a central platform, everything in the same pale bone material, everything faintly pulsing. Cale found a seat at the end of a row. The veteran cadet next to him shifted away, the ridge pattern on its face flickering into something sharp and angular. The central platform lit up. A veteran in darker wraps, older, its ridges set in deep permanent grooves, stepped to the center and spoke without opening its mouth. "Cohort 9. You are 211 cadets drawn from 47 species across the Ascendancy and its treaty partners. You have been selected because your respective governments believe you are adequate. The Veteran Ascendancy Combat Institute does not share that assessment. You are raw material. Most of you will be returned to your governments within 30 rotations, reclassified as unsuitable. The amphitheater was quiet. The program is 9 phases. Each phase eliminates. At the end of 9 phases, those who remain will be certified as Ascendancy-grade combat operators, eligible for Joint Command billets, fleet integration, and sovereign deployment authority. The certification is recognized by every military in the treaty network. The instructor's amber eyes swept the room. No human has ever completed this program. Cale felt 200 pairs of eyes find him. He didn't move. He didn't react. He looked at the instructor and kept his face exactly the way it was. Phase 1 begins now. They didn't ease into it. The floor beneath the amphitheater dropped away in sections, and Cale and 50 other cadets fell into a subterranean arena already configured for what turned out to be an obstacle course designed by someone who understood physics but didn't much care for the welfare of the beings moving through it. The first obstacle was a wall, not a climbing wall, a wall that fought back. Its surface was covered in motile tendrils that gripped, pushed, and twisted anything that touched them. The veteran cadets, with their extra joint angles, could fold themselves into shapes that slid between the tendrils. The armored cadets, the ones Cale had heard another cadet call Drothi, used brute mass to crush the tendrils flat. The liquid-bodied ones just flowed. Cale hit the wall and a tendril wrapped his forearm and jerked him sideways. He let it. The pull swung him laterally, and he used the momentum to grab higher, finding the gap between 2 tendril clusters where the wall's grip was weakest. He climbed using the wall's own aggression as a fulcrum, redirecting every push into upward motion. It wasn't fast. It wasn't elegant. But he topped the wall while 3 veteran cadets were still being cycled back to the bottom by the tendrils. No one said anything. But the veteran cadet who'd shifted away from him in the amphitheater was watching now, its ridges flickering between patterns Cale couldn't decode. The course didn't pause between obstacles. A tone sounded and they moved. The next challenge was a zero-gravity transit through a flooded corridor, the water thick with bioluminescent particulates that clogged gills and intake valves. A veteran cadet panicked when the particulates adhered to its ridge patterns and blocked its jaw-eye sensors, blinding it. It thrashed, burned energy, disoriented itself. The course proctors pulled it out. 2 Drothi locked carapaces and sank, their dense bodies unable to achieve neutral buoyancy. Cale swam. Not well, not fast, but with the patient efficiency of a species that had evolved beside oceans and had been throwing its young into water for recreational purposes since before it had language. He controlled his breathing, used his limbs to maintain orientation, and crossed the flooded corridor in a time that was unremarkable but functional. The veteran cadet who'd panicked was still being treated in the staging area when Cale exited the water, wrung out his sleeves, and moved to the next station. A Drothi near the exit, one of the pair who'd sunk, was staring at Cale with an expression that was difficult to misread even across species lines. Disbelief. The creature that couldn't thermoregulate, couldn't parallel process, couldn't flex its joints past 180 degrees, had just crossed a flooded corridor that defeated 2 armored cadets and a sensor-dominant veteran. Not by being better, by being adequate in a domain where adequacy wasn't assumed. The third obstacle was thermal, a corridor flooded with radiant heat that the veteran, with their storm cloud skin and internal cooling loops, walked through like it was a summer breeze. The Drothi's carapaces shed heat naturally. Cale's skin turned red in the first 10 meters. He soaked his undershirt in the condensation dripping from the ceiling, wrapped it around his head and neck, and ran. He came out the other side with minor burns on his forearms, and a time that was 17th out of 50. 17th. Not first, not last. solidly, unremarkably, in the middle of a field of beings whose physiology was optimized for things his wasn't. The instructor overseeing the course, a younger veteran with sharp new ridges, looked at its timing display and then at Cale. Its jaw eyes rotated, scanning him more carefully than before. "Your thermal tolerance is lower than any other species present," it said. "You completed the corridor." "Yes." "How?" Cale pulled the wet undershirt off his head. "Evaporative cooling. Water absorbs heat when it transitions from liquid to gas. I put a phase transition barrier between the heat source and my skin." The instructor's ridges shifted. It said nothing else and moved on. The fourth obstacle nearly ended Cale's run. A pressure chamber that simulated atmospheric conditions on a high-gravity colony world. The air was thick, soupy, loaded with nitrogen compounds that made his lungs burn. Every step felt like walking through wet sand. The veteran barely noticed. Their respiratory systems were built for variable atmospheres, cycling air through 3 separate filtration membranes. The Drothi sealed their carapace vents and ran on stored oxygen for the full transit. Cale made it 11 meters before his vision started to narrow. 12 meters and the edges went gray. 13 and his legs turned to concrete. He dropped to his hands and knees. The air was marginally better at floor level, the heavier nitrogen compounds pooling higher, and he crawled. 20 meters on hands and knees, his palms sliding on the cartilage floor, the nitrogen burn scorching his throat with every breath, while cadets from 4 different species walked upright above him. He cleared the chamber on all 4s and stood up on the other side with nitrogen-inflamed airways and scraped palms, and the certain knowledge that every cadet in the cohort had just watched a human crawl. The proctor logged his time, 22nd out of 50. But he'd cleared it. The proctor noted that too. The 5th obstacle was psychological. A narrow corridor lined with emitters that projected species-specific threat stimuli directly into the nervous system. For the veteran, the emitters triggered a social isolation response, the neural equivalent of being cast out from every ridge-reading community they'd ever known. Cale watched a veteran cadet stop dead in the corridor, its ridges going wild, its chest voice producing sounds that weren't words but were unmistakably distress. For the Drothi, the emitters simulated the sensation of carapace breach, the one vulnerability their armor was meant to prevent. For Cale, the emitter found his adrenal system and pushed. His heart rate spiked, his vision tunneled. Every shadow in the corridor became a threat shape. His hands shook. His legs wanted to run, not forward through the corridor but backward, away, anywhere that wasn't here. He recognized it. The emitter was giving him a panic attack, a manufactured one, clean and clinical, but physiologically identical to the real thing. And humans had a relationship with panic attacks that no other species in the cohort shared. They happened to humans naturally, in elevators, in crowds, in the middle of the night for no reason at all. Cale had had his first one at 16, on a perfectly calm Tuesday in a classroom on Earth, and he'd learned then what every human who'd ever had one eventually learned. It ends. It feels like dying, it isn't dying, and if you keep walking, it ends. He kept walking, his heart hammered, his hands shook, his vision stayed tunneled. But his legs moved, one in front of the other, 22 meters of manufactured terror, and he came out the other side with sweat running down his temples and a time that was 9th out of 50. 9th, the second best non-veteran score, because the emitter had found an attack his species had already survived 10,000 times before breakfast. Phase 1 ran for 3 days straight. No sleep breaks were announced. Cale learned quickly that the veteran didn't sleep the way humans did. They entered a semi-conscious rest state while standing, their ridge patterns going flat and gray, but they could resume full awareness in under a second. The Drothi bedded down in clusters, their carapaces interlocking for thermal regulation. Neither species seemed to understand that Cale needed to lie down, close his eyes, and be unconscious for 6 to 8 hours or his performance would degrade catastrophically. He found a storage alcove on the second night, wedged himself into the corner and slept for 4 hours. He set his internal clock, the one skill every Terran pilot learned in basic, woke on time, and walked back into the training course like he'd never left. A Drothi cadet named Torek, who had begun positioning himself near Kale during the obstacle rotations, looked at him with what Kale was starting to read as curiosity. "You disappeared," Torek said. His voice was a bass rumble that came through the carapace plates around his throat. "Needed to reset." "Reset what?" "My brain." Torek's mandibles clicked twice, which Kale had learned meant something between amusement and confusion. "Your brain requires periodic shutdown." "Every 20 hours or so, yes." "And it functions afterward." "Better than before." Torek clicked again and didn't press further. At the end of Phase 1, 31 cadets were reclassified and sent home. Kale wasn't one of them. His composite score placed him 43rd out of 180 remaining cadets, dead average, the kind of position that nobody notices and nobody targets. He was fine with that. The reclassification was clinical. The 31 cadets were assembled in a side chamber, their names read from a display, their training wraps collected. No speeches. No encouragement. The veteran system didn't soften failure with kindness. It processed failure as data. These organisms did not meet the threshold. The threshold was correct. The organisms were returned. Among the reclassified were 6 veteran. Kale noted that. The program cut its own species as efficiently as it cut anyone else. Whatever the veteran were, they weren't sentimental about it. Torek found Kale in the refectory afterward, the Drothi's tray loaded with dense protein blocks that looked like compressed gravel. "You looked at the list." "I looked at the list." "You were checking whether the system protected its own." "I was." "And it doesn't." Torek clicked his mandibles in what Kale had begun to recognize as approval. "That is why this program is worth completing." Phase 2 was weapons systems. Not personal weapons, but the integrated combat arrays that Ascendancy Warcraft used. Systems designed for beings with different hands, different reaction times, different sensory inputs. The primary interface was a neural mesh that bonded temporarily with the operator's nervous system, reading intent and translating it into weapons commands. The mesh was designed for veteran neuroanatomy. Their neural pathways ran in parallel stacks, processing multiple data streams simultaneously. A veteran weapons officer could track 9 targets, manage 3 countermeasure suites, and coordinate a firing solution while maintaining situational awareness across the entire combat envelope. Human brains didn't work that way. Kale sat in the sim pod, felt the mesh settle against the back of his skull like cold fingers pressing into clay, and immediately understood the problem. The data streams came in too wide. The mesh was pushing information into channels his brain didn't have, trying to fill 9 lanes when he had maybe 3. He failed the first calibration run. He failed the second. On the third, he stopped trying to match the veteran paradigm and did something the system wasn't expecting. He serialized. Instead of processing 9 streams simultaneously, he cycled through them in rapid sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, each one getting a fraction of a second of full attention before he moved to the next. It wasn't parallel processing. It was pattern recognition at speed. The human brain's party trick, the thing it did better than any neural architecture the Ascendancy had cataloged. Not processing more, but recognizing faster. Finding the anomaly in the data stream, the target that didn't belong, the threat pattern that was about to coalesce, and locking it before the system expected a response. His accuracy score was lower than the veteran average. His reaction time, the gap between threat presentation and firing solution, was faster than anyone in the cohort. The weapons instructor pulled his data and stared at it for a long time. Cale, standing at ease in front of the instructor's station, watched the ridge pattern shift through configurations he was beginning to catalog. This one, the rapid flutter between two patterns, meant the veteran was encountering something that didn't fit its existing framework. "Your accuracy is 61%, the instructor said. "Minimum acceptable for certification is 70. "I know. Your reaction window is 0.31 seconds. The cohort average is 0.87. "I know that too. How are you targeting that quickly with 61% accuracy?" "I'm not aiming," Cale said. "I'm filtering. I find the right target faster than I can hit it cleanly. Give me more sim time and the accuracy will come up. The filtering speed won't slow down." The instructor's ridges went flat, neutral, processing. "Additional sim allocation is not standard." "I didn't ask for standard. I told you what works." He got the sim time, not because the instructor agreed with his approach, but because the data was anomalous enough to warrant observation. The veteran were scientists at their core. Cale had figured that out early. Their military culture wasn't built on dominance or tradition. It was built on data. If the data said something interesting was happening, they'd watch it, even if the something was a human doing it wrong in a way that accidentally produced a useful result. By the end of Phase 2, Cale's accuracy was at 73%. His reaction time had dropped to 0.26 seconds. The weapons instructor filed a notation in his record that said, in the dry, bureaucratic language of the veteran military, non-standard neural integration pathway. Viable for further assessment. It wasn't praise, but Cale had been in enough military systems to know what the absence of a disqualification notice meant. Phase 3 was flight. The Ascendancy's combat craft were grown, not built. Living ships, their hulls a dense biocomposite that healed damage, their flight surfaces adaptive membranes that reshaped in real time. The cockpit was an immersion chamber filled with a breathable gel that cushioned against acceleration forces and served as a secondary neural interface. The pilot didn't so much fly the ship as merge with it, their nervous system becoming a subsystem of the vessel's distributed intelligence. For the veteran, this was natural. Their parallel processing neurology was designed for exactly this kind of integration. A veteran pilot in a bonded ship was a single organism, making adjustments at the cellular level, feeling the hull as an extension of their skin. Cale sat in the gel and felt the ship try to talk to him in a language his body didn't speak. The first training flight was a simple navigation course through the debris field of the Institute's outer ring. Cale's ship lurched, overcorrected, and nearly collided with a decommissioned hull segment in the first 30 seconds. The flight instructor, monitoring from the control tower, cut his run short and recalled him. "The ship read your stress response as a combat trigger," the instructor said when Cale climbed out of the gel, dripping. "It armed weapons and began evasive protocols." "I wasn't stressed. I was concentrating." "Your neurochemistry disagrees. Your species produces adrenaline under cognitive load. The ship interpreted adrenaline as imminent threat." Cale wiped gel off his face and thought about that. Can the ship's interpretation matrix be recalibrated? It would need to learn your baseline neurochemistry and distinguish between your concentration state and your combat state. Then let it learn. The flight instructor's ridges went through the flutter pattern. That would require you to fly in both states while the ship maps the difference. "So I fly calm, then I fly hard, and the ship figures out which is which. The process could take 40 to 60 runs. Then I'd better start." He started. While other cadets were running their standard 12 calibration flights and moving on to formation work, Cale was in the sim chamber or in an actual ship, running the same navigation course over and over, deliberately modulating his internal state so the ship could build a neurochemical dictionary. Calm run, hard run, calm run, Angry run, bored run, terrified run, which he faked by thinking about the time his trainer had depressurized at 30,000 feet over the Tharsis Basin on Mars, and he'd had 11 seconds to find and seal the breach before his blood boiled. The ship learned him, slowly, clumsily, like two people learning to dance who didn't share a common language for left and right. But by run 37, the lurching stopped. By run 42, the weapon stayed cold when he concentrated. By run 50, something shifted that Cale couldn't fully articulate. The ship stopped feeling like a machine he was operating and started feeling like a body he was wearing. Not the seamless veteran integration, not even close, but a functional partnership where the ship anticipated his intent about 60% of the time, and he could feel the hull's feedback about 40% of the time. The flight instructor pulled Cale's progression data and showed it to the senior combat instructor, the same deprivileged veteran who'd addressed the cohort on the first day. Cale wasn't in the room for that meeting, but Torek was walking past the instructor's office, and his carapace plates, he explained later, were quite good at picking up vibrations through walls. They said the word unprecedented once, Torek reported, his mandibles clicking. And then they said anomaly 4 times, and then someone said, should we stop it, and someone else said, the data says no. Cale filed that away and kept flying. The formation exam came on the last day of Phase 3. 12 ships, mixed species, flying a close pattern transit through a simulated asteroid corridor at combat speed. The corridor was tight enough that one wrong vector would cascade into a multi-ship collision. The veteran cadets flew it like they were one organism, their neural links humming in synchrony, adjustments happening at the millisecond level. Cale's ship was on the outside edge of the formation, position 12, the spot traditionally assigned to the weakest flyer because it had the most room to drift without killing anyone. He knew what the assignment meant. He didn't argue it. He flew position 12, kept his spacing tight, and when a Drothi cadet in position 7 overcorrected and sent a ripple through the formation that the veteran auto-corrected for but the other non-veteran didn't catch, Cale's ship absorbed the displacement by doing something the flight instructor had to replay 3 times to understand. He'd anticipated it. Not through the neural link, which wasn't fast enough for cross-ship awareness at his integration level, but through his eyes. He'd been watching the formation visually, tracking the micro-movements of each ship the way a human pilot tracks traffic in a formation flight through atmospheric turbulence. When the Drothi drifted, Cale saw the displacement wave coming 2 ships before it reached him and adjusted early. The flight instructor's notation read, visual kinesthetic formation awareness, compensating for limited neural integration with direct optical tracking, unorthodox, effective. Cale was starting to collect a lot of notations that said unorthodox and effective in the same sentence. Phase 4 was tactical theory. Classroom sessions, war games on holographic displays, analysis of historical engagements. This was where Cale expected to be strongest, and he was. Not because human tactical thinking was superior, but because it was different in a way the ascendancy curriculum didn't account for. The veteran approached combat as an optimization problem. Given these forces, this terrain, these objectives, what is the mathematically optimal deployment? Their war games were exercises in efficiency, finding the solution that achieved the objective with minimum resource expenditure. And they were brilliant at it. Their tactical models were so refined that a mid-tier veteran cadet could produce deployment plans that would make a Terran 3-star general study them for a week. But they had a blind spot. The models assumed rational actors on both sides. They assumed the opponent was also solving an optimization problem and would therefore respond predictably to a given input. When Cale ran his first war game against a veteran opponent, and sent a third of his force on a feint that made no tactical sense, sacrificing units in a position that gained nothing, his opponent froze. The veteran tactical model had no framework for an opponent who deliberately wasted resources. It spent critical processing time trying to identify the hidden logic behind the feint, searching for the optimization it must be missing. And in that window of confusion, Kale's remaining forces hit the objective from the undefended side. The tactical instructor stopped the game and replayed the sequence 3 times. The feint served no purpose, it said. It served exactly one purpose, Kale said. It made him think. Thinking is an advantage. Not when you're thinking about the wrong thing. He spent 8 seconds trying to understand a move that had no logic. 8 seconds in a combat engagement is eternity. The ridges shifted. The instructor looked at Kale for a long moment, its jaw eyes scanning with slow precision. You exploited a cognitive vulnerability in veteran tactical processing. I exploited a cognitive vulnerability in any species that assumes its opponent is rational. Are humans irrational? Kale considered the question carefully. Humans are capable of being irrational on purpose. We can choose to do the suboptimal thing because we know the opponent can't predict suboptimal behavior. It costs us efficiency. It buys us surprise. The instructor logged a notation. Kale's tactical scores went from the middle of the pack to the top 20, and 3 veteran cadets asked to wargame against him specifically, trying to build models that could predict his unpredictable behavior. They never fully cracked it, because the trick wasn't in the strategy. It was in the willingness to hurt yourself a little to confuse the opponent a lot. The veteran could learn the tactic, but they couldn't learn the instinct. Their optimization architecture rebelled against it at a level below conscious decision. The second war game was larger. 8-on-8 mixed teams, a resource denial scenario on a planetary surface. Kale's team had fewer heavy units but more mobility. The opposing team leader, a veteran named Voss, deployed a textbook encirclement that left no mathematical escape vector. Kale looked at the encirclement, looked at his team's disposition, and ordered a full retreat directly into the narrowest gap in the closing ring. Not through it, into it. He piled his entire force at the weakest hinge point of the encirclement, the junction where 2 flanking arms met, and hit it with everything he had. The encirclement model assumed the trapped force would either surrender, attempt to break through a gap, or fortify and endure. It did not assume the trapped force would attack the trap itself. Voss's flanking arms collapsed inward at the hinge, fouled each other's fire lanes, and Kale's team punched through the wreckage and took the resource node, while the encirclement was still sorting out its own friendly fire problem. Voss's post-game assessment was 2 words, transmitted through the chest voice in a tone Kale hadn't heard before. Unacceptable. Effective. Phases 5 and 6 blurred together. Endurance operations, the ability to maintain combat effectiveness over extended periods under degrading conditions. Sleep deprivation, environmental stressors, information overload, equipment failures cascading one into the next. The veteran could stay operational for 90 hours in their semi-rest state. The Drothi could go 60 before their carapace thermoregulation failed. Kale could go about 22 hours before his performance started to degrade. But here was the thing the program hadn't accounted for. Humans had been fighting wars while exhausted for the entire span of their history. Every doctrine, every tactic, every instinct in Kale's training had been developed by beings who were always tired, always running on less sleep than they needed, always operating in that degraded state and compensating for it with checklists and buddy systems, and the bone-deep knowledge that your brain was lying to you and you needed to verify everything twice. When the veteran cadets hit hour 72 and their semi-rest cycles started producing errors they didn't catch because their system told them they'd rested, Kale was at hour 21, fully aware that he was degraded, running his internal checklists, cross-referencing his own perceptions against the data feeds, and catching mistakes by assuming he was making them. He didn't outperform the veteran. He outperformed degraded veteran, which, by hour 90, was what the course actually tested. The endurance evaluator pulled Cale aside after the phase concluded. Its ridges were set in a pattern he hadn't seen before, something between the flutter of encountering an anomaly and the deep grooves of formal assessment. Your error rate at hour 20 was 14%, the evaluator said. Your error rate at hour 21 was 14%. Your error rate at hour 22 was 15%. At hour 23, 14%. I run checklists. You maintained a near-constant error rate while your cognitive function was demonstrably declining. Every other species in the cohort showed exponential error increase once fatigue onset began. Yours was linear, nearly flat. The evaluator's jaw eyes scanned Cale slowly. Your species anticipated its own degradation and built compensation systems into its operating doctrine. We've been tired for about 10,000 years. We got used to it. At one point during Phase 6, a veteran cadet named Lace, who had been in the top 15 throughout the program, collapsed during an information overload drill. Not physically, cognitively. Its parallel processing stacks overloaded when 3 simultaneous data feeds contained contradictory information, and the system couldn't resolve the conflict. Lace froze at its station, ridges flickering in rapid, random patterns, jaw eyes spinning without focus. The veteran equivalent of a system crash. The drill proctors pulled Lace and reclassified it. Top 15 to gone in 11 seconds. Cale watched it happen from 3 stations away. His own data feeds were contradictory too, but his brain had done what human brains do with contradictory information. It picked the feed that matched the most recent ground truth, flagged the others as suspect, and kept working. Not optimal, not parallel, but functional, because human cognition had never had the luxury of assuming all its inputs were reliable. Torek found Cale afterward. Lace was better than you in every measurable category. Lace was better than me in every category the program measured. The program didn't measure what happens when the measurements disagree. And you are better at that. Humans are better at being confused. We practice it from birth. His composite score at the midpoint of the program was 31st out of 112 remaining cadets, upper third. Not remarkable, not ignorable. Then Phase 7 happened. Phase 7 was live-fire joint operations, not simulations. Actual combat craft, actual weapons set to reduced lethality, actual consequences for failure. The exercise was a multi-team engagement in the debris field around the Institute's outer ring. Each team assigned an objective to capture while denying objectives to opposing teams. 8 teams of 12 cadets, mixed species, assigned by the program's algorithm. Cale's team leader was a veteran named Salith, a top 10 cadet with ridge patterns so precise they looked engraved. Salith was fast, brilliant, and had never once acknowledged Cale's existence beyond the minimum required for tactical coordination. The team included 4 other veteran, 3 Drothi, 2 of the liquid-bodied mycelians, and Torek, who had positioned himself as Cale's wingman through the flight phases by the simple expedient of refusing to fly with anyone else. The operation started clean. Salith's tactical plan was a work of veteran optimization, every unit positioned for maximum efficiency, every contingency mapped, every variable accounted for. Every variable except the one that made itself known 40 minutes in, when a debris segment that had been flagged as inert in the briefing data began to move. It wasn't debris. It was a dormant defense platform, part of the Institute's outer ring security grid that should have been deactivated for the exercise. Something had reactivated it, a system fault, a software cascade, a maintenance error nobody caught. The platform was old, pre-treaty, designed to engage anything that entered its perimeter with kinetic projectiles at full combat velocity. Not reduced lethality, full. The first burst hit Cadet Riss, a mycelium, and Kale watched the pilot's ship come apart in a spray of biocomposite and gel that tumbled through vacuum in slow, silent pieces. Riss's telemetry went flat. Not simulation flat. Dead flat. Salith's reaction was immediate and correct. Emergency abort broadcast. All units disengage and withdraw. The veteran optimization engine was already running, calculating the fastest safe vector away from the platform's engagement envelope. But the platform was between them and the Institute, and 3 cadets from other teams, deeper in the debris field, were inside the platform's perimeter and hadn't received the abort signal because the platform's activation had scrambled local communications. Kale heard the signal scatter. He heard Salith order withdrawal. He heard the silence from the 3 cadets who were about to fly into a kill zone they didn't know existed. "Salith," he said over the team channel, 3 units are still inside the perimeter. They can't hear the abort." "Acknowledged. Institute emergency protocols will recover them." Institute emergency protocols take 4 minutes to activate. The platform cycles every 90 seconds. Salith's ridges shifted. Even through the ship's neural link, Kale could feel the team leader's tactical model running. Entering the platform's engagement envelope to warn them would expose the warning craft to full lethality fire. Yes. The optimal decision is to withdraw and allow Institute emergency systems to respond. The optimal decision gets 3 cadets killed. The probability of Institute systems responding in time is 61%. The probability of me reaching them and broadcasting a close-range warning is higher than that. Silence on the channel. Kale could feel Salith's optimization engine processing, weighing the cost of 1 human cadet against the probability of saving 3, calculating whether the math supported the action. Kale didn't wait for the math. He broke formation, jammed his throttle forward, and dove into the debris field toward the platform's perimeter. Behind him, he heard Torek's bass rumble say one word: "Following." "Torek, no. Your carapace won't survive a kinetic hit at this velocity. Your skin won't survive one either. 2 ships draw more fire than 1. More fire at us means less fire at them." There was no time to argue. Kale's ship punched through the perimeter threshold, and the platform's targeting arrays locked onto him immediately. He felt the ship's hull ripple as it sensed the incoming threat, felt the weapons try to arm, felt the ship's learned dictionary of his neurochemistry correctly identify this as a combat state and respond accordingly. This time, for the first time, the ship and Kale moved as one. He rolled hard, using a spinning debris fragment as cover, and the first kinetic burst passed through the space he'd just vacated. The ship's adaptive membranes reshaped themselves to present a minimal cross-section, and Kale felt the adjustment like flexing a muscle he'd only just discovered he had. "Broadcasting on all emergency frequencies," Kale said. "All units inside the outer ring perimeter, this is Cadet Marin. The debris platform at grid reference 772 is live. Full lethality. Abort your run and exit the perimeter on any vector that isn't toward the platform. Confirm receipt." Static, the platform's scrambling effect was still active. "Torek, I need you to get closer to them. Close enough for line-of-sight comms. That puts me deeper in the engagement zone." "I know, I'll keep the platform busy." "Keep it busy how?" "By being the thing it most wants to shoot." Kale pushed the ship into a climbing turn that brought him broadside to the platform's primary array. Every targeting sensor on the platform swung toward him, and for a stretched, crystalline moment, he was the only target in the machine's world. He felt the hull shudder as a kinetic round grazed the ventral surface, felt the biocomposite begin its repair cycle, felt the ship scream through the neural link in a language that wasn't language but was unmistakably pain. He held course. 3 seconds. 5, 7. The platform fired again, a 3-round burst, and he twisted away from the first two, felt the third clip the dorsal fin, a sharp crack that sent vibrations through the gel and up his spine. The ship's damage indicators lit amber. Survivable. Barely. Torek now. Torek dove, his armored ship plunging through the gap in the platform's attention, and 30 seconds later, Kale heard 3 bewildered confirmations on the emergency channel. The stranded cadets were moving. Torek was shepherding them toward the perimeter boundary. The platform retargeted. It found Kale again because Kale had made himself findable, flying a pattern designed to keep the arrays pointed at him and away from the retreating cadets. 3 more bursts. He dodged the first 2. The third caught his port wing. The impact was like being hit by a ground car. The ship lurched, the wing membrane tearing, biocomposite fragments spiraling into vacuum. The neural link transmitted the damage as a searing line of fire down Kale's left arm, and for one ugly second, his vision whited out and the ship went ballistic, tumbling end over end through the debris field. Training took over, not veteran training, Terran training. The kind drilled into every combat pilot who'd ever flown a machine that could break. When the aircraft fails, you fly the failure. Kale's right hand found the manual override, a system the veteran hadn't bothered to disable because no veteran would ever abandon the neural link for manual control. He cut the link, felt the ship go deaf and dumb around him, and flew by hand. Stick and throttle, eyeball and instinct. The sensory richness of the neural integration vanished and was replaced by the cold, narrow tunnel of manual instruments and a viewport full of spinning debris. The ship was crippled. The port wing was gone. Manual control gave him about 30% of normal maneuverability. But he could still move, and he moved away from the platform, limping through the debris field on one wing in pure stubbornness, using the tumbling fragments as cover, threading gaps that his instruments couldn't measure but his eyes could see. He crossed the perimeter boundary, and the platform's arrays lost interest. The Institute's emergency systems activated 90 seconds later. The platform was shut down by remote kill command. By the time the recovery ships reached Kale, he'd managed to stabilize his tumble and was drifting in a slow rotation, bleeding from a cut above his right eye where his head had hit the cockpit wall, his left arm numb from the neural echo of the hull breach, his ship dying around him in small organic sounds that the gel transmitted as soft, wet clicks. The recovery crew was veteran. They cut him out of the gel and carried him to the medical bay, and the medic who examined him, a veteran with ridges so old they were almost smooth, said something Kale would remember long after his arm stopped hurting. "You severed the neural link and flew manually." "The link was compromised. Manual was all I had." No veteran has ever voluntarily severed a neural link during flight. The psychological shock of disconnection is classified as a Category 3 trauma. We would rather risk the damaged link than face the silence. Kale looked at his numb left hand and flexed the fingers. They responded sluggishly. Humans are used to silence. We fly alone inside our own heads every day. Losing the link just put me back where I started. The medic's ridges went flat and stayed there for a long time. The inquiry took 2 days. Kale spent them in the medical bay, his left arm in a regenerative sleeve that the veteran medics had adapted for human tissue, with the kind of clinical fascination that made him feel more like a research subject than a patient. Torek visited, bringing what passed for food in the Institute's cafeteria and his own blunt commentary. "Salith is in the inquiry room," Torek reported. "The question is whether the team leader's decision to withdraw was correct." "It was correct. It was the optimal call." "You didn't follow it." "I made a different call. A suboptimal one. One that kept 3 cadets alive." Torek's mandibles clicked slowly. "The veteran are having difficulty with this. Their system says Salith was right. Their cadets are alive because you were wrong in the right direction." "What are they calling it?" "They don't have a word for it yet. They keep using anomaly. Cale almost smiled. The inquiry concluded with no disciplinary action. The report stated that Cadet Marin had violated a direct withdrawal order, entered a known lethal engagement zone, sustained significant damage to an ascendancy combat craft, and directly contributed to the survival of 3 cadets who would otherwise have been at 61% probability of death. The veteran system couldn't optimize that equation. It couldn't reconcile the violation with the outcome. So it did what veteran systems did when they encountered data that didn't fit. It logged it and moved on. But something had shifted in the cohort that no log entry captured. When Cale returned from the medical bay to the training corridor, the veteran cadets made room for him differently than before. Not the wide berth of avoiding a misprint. A measured space, deliberate, the kind of clearance given to something that had been recategorized but not yet fully filed. Phase 8 was command evaluation, small unit leadership under stress. Each cadet was given command of a mixed-species fire team and run through a series of escalating scenarios designed to find the point where their decision-making broke. Salith excelled as expected. The veterans' tactical optimization ran clean and fast under pressure, producing deployment solutions that were consistently in the top 5% of outcomes. 3 other veterans scored similarly. The Drothi candidates were strong in defensive scenarios, their patient, rock-steady temperament translating into fire teams that held position under withering pressure without breaking. Cale drew a fire team of 2 veteran, a Drothi and a Mycelian. The veteran were competent but had never taken direction from a non-veteran. The Drothi was Torek, who required no motivation. The Mycelian was a replacement for Riss, new to the cohort, visibly uncertain. The first scenario was a standard defense in depth. Cale set the positions, let the veteran cadets run their optimization models for the deployment, and then adjusted one position based on something the models hadn't accounted for. The Mycelian's ability to flow through structural gaps too small for any other species. "You're my early warning," Cale told the Mycelian. "You go where nobody expects a body to fit. You watch, you report, you don't fight." The scenario requires all team members to engage. The scenario requires the objective to be held. You hold it by making sure I know what's coming before it gets here. The Mycelian flowed into a maintenance conduit that the scenario designers had included as environmental detail, not as a tactical position. From inside it, the Mycelian had line of sight to the approach corridor that every attacking force in the scenario had to use. Cale's team held the objective through 3 escalation waves because they were never surprised. Every attack was met by a defense that was already in position, already oriented, already waiting. The second scenario was an offensive operation against a fortified position. Cale studied the defenses, ran the numbers, and told his team something none of them expected. "We're not going to win this one head-on." The 2 veterans stiffened. Torek's mandibles stopped mid-click. The Mycelian rippled. The fortification is designed to be taken by a team with veteran standard parallel coordination. We don't have that. If we assault on the expected axis, we lose. Cale pulled up the tactical display and pointed. So we don't assault. We fix the enemy force in position and wait for Team 6 to take their objective on the adjacent sector. When they do, the fortification's flank opens. We take it then. "That requires Team 6 to succeed," one of the veterans said. "We cannot control that variable." "No, but I can predict it. Their leader is Salith. Salith doesn't fail at standard optimization problems. We wait, we fix, we exploit the gap." It took 7 minutes. Cale's team held position, absorbing harassing fire, the veteran growing visibly uncomfortable with the inaction, Torek holding steady because Torek understood patient defense at a biological level. When Team 6 breached their objective, and the fortification's flank exposure appeared exactly where Cale had predicted, his team moved. The assault took 90 seconds. Clean, fast, the kind of execution that only worked because the preparation had been done by waiting. The command evaluator noted that Cale's tactical solutions were not optimal by veteran standards. They were, however, robust. They worked even when conditions changed, because they weren't built on the assumption that conditions would stay predictable. They also noted that Cale's approach had included a variable no other cadet had introduced into their command assessment: trust in another team's competence as a deliberate tactical input. Cale's command score placed him 11th out of 94 remaining cadets. Phase 9 was the final assessment, a 72-hour continuous operation that combined every skill the program had tested: flight, weapons, tactics, endurance, leadership, and the ability to function in a joint species environment where no two team members processed information the same way. Cale's body was running on muscle memory and checklists by hour 40. His eyes were gritty, his reactions a half-second slower than his peak, and the cut above his eye had reopened and was bleeding again, a slow trickle he kept wiping away with the back of his hand. The regenerative sleeve had healed his arm, but the veteran medic had warned him that the neural echo might resurface under stress. It did at hour 44. A ghost pain that lit up his left side like the hull breach was happening again. He flew through it, not around it, through it, because there was no around. The pain was data. It told him his body was stressed. He already knew that, so he logged it the way the veteran logged anomalies and kept moving. At hour 51, his team took a casualty. A veteran cadet named Dren, steady and competent, misjudged a debris transit and clipped an asteroid fragment. The ship spun, the neural link fed Dren corrupted data, and instead of severing the link the way Cale had, Dren tried to fly through the corruption. The ship slammed into a second fragment and broke apart. The recovery team pulled Dren out alive but injured, the veteran's ridges flickering in the random, senseless pattern of neural shock. Cale reorganized the team in 90 seconds, redistributed Dren's sector coverage, and kept the operation running. He didn't pause to process the loss. He didn't allow himself to think about Riss, who hadn't been pulled out alive, or about the thin margin between Dren's outcome and Riss's. He logged the casualty, adjusted the plan, and moved. Torek, flying beside him, said nothing, but his mandibles clicked once. The slow, deliberate click that Cale had learned meant respect for something the Drothai recognized but couldn't name. At hour 54, the operation's complexity spiked. 3 teams merged their objectives into a coordinated assault that required real-time deconfliction across 27 ships and 4 species communication protocols. Cale's team was assigned the suppression corridor, the lane that would draw enemy fire while the main assault force punched through. It was, Cale recognized, the same role he'd played against the defense platform. The bait, the thing that gets shot at so others can move. The difference was that this time it was planned, sanctioned, and his team knew the role before they flew it. The 2 veterans on his team hesitated. Flying deliberate bait went against every optimization instinct they had. Torek didn't hesitate. The mycelium didn't hesitate. And because Cale had earned something in Phase 7 that didn't appear in any scoring rubric, the 2 veterans followed. They flew the suppression corridor for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of reduced lethality fire that wasn't zero lethality, threading debris at speed, drawing every sensor and every gun in the defensive array toward their ships and away from the assault force. The mycelium ship took a hit that spun it into a slow tumble. Cale talked the mycelium through the recovery, calm and specific, the way his own flight instructor on Earth had talked him through his first engine-out drill. The mycelium recovered. The assault force breached, the objective fell. Salith's voice came over the shared channel afterward. One word directed at Cale: acknowledged. From Salith, that was almost affection. At hour 58, the scenario shifted. What had been a complex but manageable multi-team operation suddenly became something else. The Institute's senior staff had introduced a variable that none of the remaining cadets had anticipated, a simulated first contact event. An unknown vessel, broadcasting on no recognized frequency, behaving in ways that fit no tactical model, entering the operational area and refusing to respond to hails. The veteran cadets defaulted to their training: scan, classify, optimize, respond. But the unknown vessel didn't scan cleanly, couldn't be classified, and responded to every optimized approach by doing something that made the optimization invalid. It was, Cale realized after watching 3 veteran team leaders exhaust their tactical models in succession, designed to be unsolvable by optimization. It was the war game feint, scaled up to an operational level. The unknown vessel was the suboptimal actor, the irrational element, the thing that couldn't be modeled because it didn't follow rules. Cale opened his channel. All units, this is Marin. Stop trying to model it. It's not solvable. It's designed to break your models. Silence on the channel. 60-odd exhausted cadets from a dozen species, all waiting. The exercise wants to see what we do when optimization fails. When the tactical plan doesn't work and the data doesn't help and the situation doesn't make sense. It wants to see if we can act without certainty. More silence. Then Saleth's voice, clipped and precise. What do you propose? Talk to it. It doesn't respond to hails. Hails are optimized communication, formatted, structured, following protocol. Try something unstructured. Try something that doesn't follow protocol. Such as? Cale thought about it for 2 seconds. Then he opened a broadband channel, the kind used for emergency all-hands broadcasts that nobody encrypted because the whole point was to be heard by everyone, and he said, "Hey, we see you. We don't know what you are. We're not going to shoot. If you want to talk, we're here." The unknown vessel stopped. It turned slowly and oriented toward Cale's ship. A signal came back on the broadband channel, simple, unstructured, the first communication it had offered, a single sustained tone. "It's responding to the absence of protocol," the tactical instructor said from the control tower, speaking to the entire cohort for the first time since the exercise began. "The exercise is concluded." The final briefing was held in the same amphitheater where Cohort 9 had assembled on the first day. The tiered seating that had held 211 cadets now held 63. Cale sat at the end of a row, the same row he'd chosen at the start, but the veteran cadet next to him didn't shift away this time. Its ridges were held in a pattern Cale had learned to read: attentive, respectful, present. The deep-ridged senior instructor stepped to the central platform. 63 cadets will be certified as Ascendancy-grade combat operators. You have earned Joint Command eligibility, Fleet Integration Clearance, and Sovereign Deployment Authority. The amphitheater was still. Cale could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what the certification meant across the treaty network. A veteran in a Joint Command billet was expected. A Drothi in Fleet Integration was routine. A human with Sovereign Deployment Authority was something that had never existed before. One notation. The instructor's amber eyes found Cale. Cadet Marin, human, Terran cooperative. Cale met the instructor's gaze and held it. Your composite score across 9 phases places you 14th. Your flight integration was the slowest in the cohort to calibrate and among the most adaptive once calibrated. Your tactical approach has been classified as non-standard in 7 separate evaluations. You violated a direct order during Phase 7, and the 3 cadets you reached are sitting in this room because of it. The amphitheater was completely silent. Cale could hear the bioluminescent veins in the walls humming their faint, living frequency. When we designed the unknown vessel scenario, we modeled 46 possible responses from the remaining cadets, 46 ways the cohort might react to an unsolvable problem. None of our models predicted that a cadet would simply talk to it. The instructor paused. Its ridges settled into the deepest grooves Cale had seen, the pattern he'd come to associate not with any single emotion, but with something closer to formal acknowledgement. The program assessment has added a 47th model to our tactical library. It is classified under a new category that did not exist before Cohort 9. What category? Someone asked. Cale didn't see who. Adaptive non-optimization, the capacity to recognize when systematic problem-solving has failed and to replace it with direct, unstructured engagement. The instructor's eyes rotated toward Cale. The capacity, as Cadet Marin demonstrated, to be wrong in the right direction. Cale sat in his seat at the end of the row, his left arm aching with the ghost of a hull breach that had healed weeks ago. A thin scar above his right eye that the veteran medics could have erased, but he'd asked them to leave, and a certification in his record that said he belonged in a seat no human had ever occupied. Torek was beside him. The Drothai's mandibles clicked once softly. "They named a category after you," Torek said. "They named a category after a concept. I just happened to demonstrate it." "That's the same thing." Cale looked at the amphitheater, at the 62 other cadets who'd survived 9 phases of a program designed to find the edges of what each species could do and push past them. Veteran, Drothai, Mycelians, 2 species he'd never learned the names of, and 1 human. Not the best, not the brightest, not the most optimized, but present, certified, and carrying a scar that proved the certification had cost something real. The ceiling above the amphitheater was the same bioluminescent membrane he'd woken up under on the first day. It still pulsed with soft teal light, still breathed with a rhythm that wasn't his. But he'd learned its frequency. And somewhere in the living architecture of the Veteran Ascendancy Combat Institute, the architecture had learned his.